Luca has got to be one of those characters who the story's never really known what to do with. His arcs have always been very erratic and stop and start, and it's never really been clear what they're going to try to do with his character and where they're going to go with him. Every season it seems like it's something new and different, going in the opposite direction than it was before. It can be very confusing and frustrating because he's had so much narrative potential over the years, only for it to be squandered again and again and again. It just has me shaking my head. Honestly, I really shouldn't invest any time in trying to predict where his story's going to be headed, but I do have my latest somewhat crackpot theory of what his arc is going to look like going forward. One that tries to bring all his different story threads together into one cohesive whole. I think Luke is going to become the Guardian. Not a Guardian, because we know he was training off screen for such a thing. I'm talking about the Guardian, either of the box, or perhaps replacing Suhan as the Supreme Guardian or whatever they call it. I just think it makes a lot of sense. And like I said, it can tie together the various different eras of Luca's character, so to speak, to form one cohesive whole that when you reflect on his character, can make it seem like this was always leaning towards this endgame, even if it very obviously was not the case if you experienced it in real time. It'll improve the rewatch is what I'm trying to say. So I guess we'd better do a deep dive into Luca's arc just to set the stage, right? Luca's first introduced into the story in the episode Captain Hardrock as Julika's brother. I think they're twins in the current era of the story, but I swear when he was introduced he was their older brother. Anyway, he's introduced to the story as the counterpart to Kagami. Kagami at this stage throughout all of Season 2 and 3 is clearly positioned as the competing love interest for Marinette in regards to Adrian's affection. So Luke is simply the alternate version of that, giving Marinette somebody who actually seems to have romantic interest in her to provide that alternate ship. He doesn't really get all that much screen time in Season 2, but it's clear what they're doing with him from the get-go when he's introduced. This continues with blushing and cuteness on both sides all throughout Seasons 2 and 3, although I must say, even back then, whilst the character was cool and all and got massively popular, which is rare for alternate ship characters in my experience, where they often end up being hated, that said, of the four characters in the storyline, Adrian, Marinette, Kagami, and Luca, his story had the least meat on the bones the whole time. Kagami and Adrian have the whole family connection and plot relevance, whilst Marinette has this obsession with Adrian that dominates much of the show, and a slow burn rivals to close friends arc with Kagami. Meanwhile, there's no real rivalry with Luca and Adrian for Marinette's affection at this point, as Adrian's all in on Ladybug and Marinette's love is unrequited. They actually become good friends later on in Season 4 and beyond, but here, Luca's just a very generic, friendly sort of guy. Then we come towards the end of Season 3, where the big ships start to take a brief back seat. The Lady Noir drama hits a fever pitch as Cat Noir's rejected again and again by Ladybug, so Adrian seems to lose heart, and if we're brutally honest, he settles for Kagami right at the end of Season 3. I think it's legitimately the final episode. Meanwhile, Luca's making some progress with Marinette, who's also coming to the realization that it just might not be happening for her and Adrian. That perhaps it was always meant to be just a crush on her side with no reciprocation. That her obsession's getting the best of her, and now she needs to move on to being the new Guardian, but also giving Luca a shot. So this is the status quo of the story that we're dealing with entering into Season 4. The two alternate ships have set sail, and whilst you know that it's not going to last forever, there is some sort of expectation that it'll be a bit more of a meaty storyline. Luca's first real meaty storyline at that, which was exciting. Except maybe not, as like I said earlier, the storylines for Luca will pivot wildly at any moment. So here he has a very brief run as Marinette's boyfriend that lasted about one episode into Season 4, before the fact that she was the Guardian got in the way of their burgeoning romance and sank the ship before it could truly sail. That was a shame because it felt like they were setting him up for an interesting arc for a while there. Instead, they shift him into more of a friend and confidant role for Marinette. The dude simps hard and so is perfectly willing to just be her friend and somebody she can talk to, even about things like her feelings for Adrian. On top of that, he actually befriends Adrian properly too, which I actually liked from Season 4 when I watched it. It's one of my favourite things they included. It kept Luca as this rather two-dimensional, pure and generous guy who would give you the shirt off his back with no flaws or nuance in sight to give him a bit of interest, but that's okay. You're not going to get that all of the time. But then they pivoted into something exciting with the episode Wishmaker. In that episode, he learns a lot of key information, namely the true secret identities of both Ladybug and Cat Noir, being Marinette and Adrian respectively. So obviously, this is a pretty big deal for his character, and suddenly his story can once again take a pivot. Again. But it's a good one this time. This can increase his importance in the hero team, and hell, since he knows who each of them is, could even open him up to being a confidant for them if he reveals his knowledge. Doesn't really matter that much for Marinette, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, because she already has Alia as her confidant, and had done since the end of Gang of Secrets, I'm pretty sure. But Adrian's had nobody this whole time. For years, people had been growing more and more discontent with the fact that Adrian always seems to take a narrative backseat, and was being shunted off more and more to the side, the further along the story would go. So this would kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and give two underutilized characters something to do, whilst giving Luca a big trump card that would be interesting if he ever got akumatized again. That's some finale level villain potential right there. I was so sure the story was heading in that direction. They'd use Luca as a bit more of a moral support / confidant role for Adrian in Wishmaker, where he gives him that pep talk of doing what he wants to do with his life and being what he wants to be. It was all very wholesome and lovely. Regardless though, it doesn't last all that long if we're being honest. Dude goes missing in action for a huge chunk of the first part of season 5, only for him to unceremoniously get shipped off on a world tour because it wouldn't be safe for him to stay in Paris as Monarch knows that he knows the secret identities. So we have yet another out of nowhere sudden pivot in his storyline that left him feeling directionless and more of a tertiary character than he had ever felt before. A shame, but I don't know what I was expecting at that point. I think I was just being a little bit too delusional if I'm being perfectly honest. Doesn't really matter, does it? What's done is done, and when he returns, he's seemingly become a guardian off screen, or at least started to train to become a guardian. He knows, what was it called again? Kung Fu. Anyway, it's the fighting that lets you take on miraculous users and akumatized villains and succeed. So that has us all caught up on his backstory and its twists and turns, but it also gives us a solid foundation for what could be a future storyline for him. That of course, he takes up an important mantle within the Order of the Guardians, either as a Guardian of the Box replacing Marinette, or as the leader following on from Su-Han. I think either of these work, but most importantly for me, I think they both give the opportunity for them to tie the different eras of his character together into one cohesive whole, so they can pretend like they had this creative vision for his character from the very beginning. In terms of his initial romance storyline, which petered off into deep friendship and platonic love, him being a guardian sort of ties that story more firmly into Marinette's own. He can be her sounding board and ally that she can go to in times of trouble when she needs advice that Ali is not able to give her, because unlike the two of them, Ali is not a guardian. On top of that, I think Luca has this air of maturity and peaceful acceptance of the world that no other character really has. At times, he honestly feels like they've transplanted Master Fu into a young man's body. He's wise and clever, with a cheeky heart, but also a bit of naivety to counterbalance it. So in a way, you'd be able to somewhat bring back that dynamic that was lost when Fu lost his memory of the Miraculous and of who Marinette was to him. I think the show has been missing that a lot. You can reutilize that idea of Luca being the only person who knows both the identities of Ladybug and Cat Noir, and give Adrian somebody to talk to in that regard. It wouldn't even really be sus for Adrian either, because he knows that Luca went off on a world tour, and it probably would have gotten around that he returned to fight with the monks. He gives Adrian a sounding board, which I think he will need going forward, considering the events of the last episode and the special. Somebody who understands him and knows who he is, and thus somebody who can tailor his advice and assistance to that specifically. It would be such a shame to have the Adrian-Luca bromance and Luca's special knowledge go to waste and fall by the wayside. Just a huge missed opportunity if that was the case. On top of that, it ties back into his training with the monks. Could you imagine if that never goes anywhere at all? If that was the case, it would be so clear that they never ever had a plan for him, and he left during season 5 just to conveniently get him out of the way because his knowledge makes him too OP. Just like how they always have to write out Alex, except for special occasions, because time travel is silly. That would just be sad though. But that being said, I feel like most of these plot points would be accomplished if he sort of replaces Su-Han as either the leader guardian, which admittedly at the early stage feels unlikely, but what's more likely is that he can perhaps become the Guardian's major representative in Paris. After all, it does feel like the further you go along, the more redundant Su-Han's becoming. But Luca can triple dip. Confidant to Ladybug, check. Potential confidant to Cat Noir, check. Guardian, check. Well, he can quadruple dip because he's also a miraculous user. Pfft, Su-Han who? I'm on the Luca bandwagon now. As I said though, these are all if he replaces Su-Han in Paris, which is relatively easy and straightforward. It doesn't require any leaps in logic or crazy twists, as Su-Han can just go back to the temple and away from all the modern stuff that distracted him in earlier seasons. But what about the idea of Marinette giving up her position of the Guardian willingly? Could that work? Could she give up the box? It would be an interesting concept for sure. After all, the idea of Lila pushing her to the brink to the point that she has no option but to renounce her place as Guardian and thus fall victim to the memory wipe, that would be a huge plot point, a really compelling one with a lot of story potential. Obviously, for the main story to function properly, this would need to be reversed or changed so it doesn't happen. Bunnix, come on down. But at the same time, it would be really interesting. Although, then you can argue, well, why would Marinette need to renounce her spot? She gave out the Miraculouses for that very reason, to ensure that nobody can simply steal the box and get an easy path to victory. Maybe the door's closed on that sort of storyline then. Either way, it would be cool to see, with Luca being the most obvious choice for who would succeed her in such a what-if scenario. But yeah, at this point I better wrap it up before it just becomes full-on rambling, so I will just remind you these have all just been my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of my idea today? Are you with me, or is it a swing or a miss? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.